Hi, Sarah. Welcome. I am so excited that you're here to talk about this on the podcast.
Yes, hello. I'm super excited to dive into all the things.
Yes, exactly. So I'm actually going to redo that again because I'm thinking you were here before, but they don't know you were here before. So let's try that again.
I'm like, we've been together and in so many spaces,
I
just
know.
not
And everybody's like,
podcaster.
okay, yeah, that's weird. I'm thinking that's weird. Okay, let's try this again. Hi, Sarah. Welcome. I am so glad you're here to talk about this today.
Hello. Yeah, super excited to dive in.
Awesome. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, you and I have known each other for a while. And so I have the privilege of knowing a little bit about your story and how you got into doing all of this work that we're going to talk about today. But I would love for you to just share a little bit with the audience so that they know who you are and where you're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been a journey. So now I'm really focused on the nervous system work, nervous system resolution, working with people holistically in order to get out of fight or flight or get into their body more or move past things like perfectionism, people pleasing, overwhelm, burnout, anxiety from a nervous system standpoint. But my passion for that, like if I had said that to 10 years ago me, I A, wouldn't have known what most of that meant, and B, it was a very different world. So I actually came into the whole healing world, coaching world, everything like that from a very personal place. I used to work in crisis communications in a really high stress job. And so I had a lot of burnout, a lot of anxiety, a lot of overwhelm from that work. And I honestly came into it even from a place of having events that I now would call trauma, but then I wouldn't have used that big word. I would have
Mm-hmm.
just called to be challenges, difficulties when I was growing up. So I definitely ran as a really anxious, overachiever, perfectionist, success oriented person, which in a lot of ways served me, but then in a lot of ways also led to burnout. And so, being in a high stress job, I was really good at it and burnt out really quickly. And so I started exploring so many different things of like, what's going to help this. I worked with coaches, body workers. I started soul connection work, which I still talk a lot about, and then ended up transitioning into more of a business coaching role. I was in PR and marketing and business consulting. And so I was like, well, I just know it's not corporate. And I know that I need to do something that feels more connected to me and that feels like I can help the people I love. So I started doing that business coaching for healers and coaches and yoga teachers and nonprofits. But all the clients who were attracted to me, it wasn't about that at all. It ended up being so much work around what's your vision and why aren't you doing it, or why is it changing, or how do we get back to creativity, or anxious, overwhelmed, stuck in the idea phase. And as I really dug into that, what became really curious for me was like, in my own journey of what stopped me from launching things, what was stopping me from doing the big idea I had. And it was a lot of times that anxiety and overwhelm where it was like, I couldn't put a single other client on my calendar because it would have been too emotionally exhausting to have that added to my day. Or I couldn't imagine if doing those, like having my business grow to the scale that was in my mind, because my burnout was already so big from managing other things. And so I came across the somatic work and somatic healing and somatic therapy. And it was a huge light bulb moment for me, because not only was it really pivotal from a business perspective of, oh yeah, our clients can be going into fight or flight or freeze around specific business related activities, or that could be stopping us from creating our idea. But it really brought me all the way back to the anxiety that had been in my childhood, that had been the real roots of it, and understanding how to break really old patterns that hadn't been serving me for a long time.
Yeah. Oh gosh. You and I have talked a lot over the years and we have so many connections and so many things in common. And yet again, I'm hearing you tell your story and I'm like, oh yeah, I had one of those jobs too.
Yeah.
I really think that is why I ended up with fibromyalgia was, all of that just chronic continual stress of having such a stressful job and not having the tools to know what to do with that stress, right? So it's
Yeah.
all
Well,
being
and
internalized.
it's fascinating to me now. I think the type of people I work actually with, a lot of nurses, with a lot of people who are come into the coaching world because of a background of not like feeling burnout or not fitting in or feeling overstressed and overworked. I think a lot of the people who are good at those high stress jobs, it's because their body is so used to being in that fight or flight, in that prep stress state, that they're really good at it. They're totally the type that are like, I live in this on all the time world all the time, so I'm going to knock all this out for you and I've got it. But then that takes such a toll. And like for some people, it takes longer to catch up to their body than others. Mine, it was not long before my body was like, this is not going to work out for us.
Right, exactly. And I think for all of us, it shows up in a lot of different ways. It could be headaches, it could be high blood pressure, it could be fibromyalgia, it could be autoimmune stuff. It can be so many different things, and stress just plays such a role in all of that. So I love that you are here to talk about befriending your nervous system, because I think so many of us really try to fight against it, right?
Yeah, well, and we're just not taught to think about it that way, especially there can be a lot of rhetoric out there that makes people feel guilty for like not being able to keep up, or like, oh, I'm too anxious about this, or I should be able to do more, or I'm too tired. And like it's a lot of self-blame rhetoric that society creates around that, when in reality, our nervous system is operating that way for a reason, even if it's not how we'd like it to be. Maybe it's not our favorite mode, and we ourselves even want something to change or shift. It's there, it's doing it for a reason. It's protecting us, it's operating on something that helped us survive in the past. And so it's really empowering to start to understand what it's operating on and how to maybe retune it a little, so that if there's something we don't love that's happening, there's a little bit more agency around that.
I think that's such a powerful thing, being able to have, take back some of our control, to be able to make choices and, kind of choose our direction a little bit. But sometimes it so often feels like that's not even an option, right? I mean, amygdala hijack is a thing. Going into
Yeah.
fight or flight or freeze, we often don't feel like we have that choice. So how do we get that choice back when our brains and our nervous system sometimes take control?
Yeah, well, and that's a really good question. And basically, we can work with that in session. That's what my background, my training teaches, of how to slow down those moments. So if we have it can be a typical pattern that we know, that's like, oh, I always get stressed if I start to run late for something, and that really pulls me out of it. Or like, oh, I always notice I go into fight or flight when I have to have a confrontation or a difficult conversation. So sometimes we might know those moments that are already happening, and we can go in and start to slow down what's happening in the nervous system in that time frame, so that we start to allow the body to express what it wanted to, that it doesn't feel like it can in those moments. So the way I describe it a lot is, most of the time when we have a really automatic reaction and we don't love how it makes us feel, if it makes us feel tired or anxious or shut down, we're probably being pulled in a couple different directions. We probably have part of us that wants to do something, or say, that wants to say like, no, I don't want to do that, or wants to walk away from the situation, or is like, this doesn't work for me. We have a little bit of either that fight or flight response, but then we also probably have something else pulling on us that makes it feel unsafe to do that. So whether that is the actual situation of what's in front of us, whether that's people pleasing, where we're like, oh, I'm going to upset this person so I don't feel safe doing it, or whatever it might be. And it creates kind of this like ball of whatever you want to picture. I say yarn a lot, but it's like energy or yarn that is like, our body wants to do one thing and we also feel called in a different direction, and we kind of freeze up, and it leaves all of that stress response in our body from, again, maybe big or small, I'll put it in air quotes, but small moments. And then that creates a similar pattern. And so we have to slow that down and start to let the body express like, ooh, if you wanted to fight back, can we bring in some of that fight energy? If you wanted to walk away, can we do that? And when we give it that space, it creates then less of the feeling of overwhelm if a similar situation comes up. So we have room for choice, like what we talked about. So instead of it feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do, there's no other option, the body can slow that process down. And you might be like, oh yeah, I do have the choice to speak up or to walk away, or I do have the choice to go on stage and make the speech or not if I don't want to, but I can choose how to move through that, and there's space for it instead of it being a in one instant immediate thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think some of that is, I imagine, a learned skill as well, right? The more you do it, the easier it gets.
Yeah, it's learned. And once we start to create the patterns in session, a lot of times, like the body muscle memory is a thing for the nervous system too. The body can remember. So I all the time have clients who are shocked how quickly it becomes a pathway. Like I always give the visualization of it's like we built a different path down the mountain. Your body's used to like hiking the same trail up, and it never figured out how to get back down, or it doesn't have a conscious map of how to get back down. And when we create that in sessions, sure, you still might hike back up that mountain. You still might have times where you get anxious or upset or sad or whatever it is, but we've created the pathway back, and it plugs in more seamlessly than people expect, where something different than what we worked on in session might make them anxious. And then all of a sudden they're like, whoa, I knew what tool to do. And it was like instant. And I came back to a place of calm way faster. And I didn't have to do much. And my body just knew, it felt like it could like plug back in to that place in the nervous system in a way that it hadn't had access to before.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me a lot of, I had piano lessons for, I don't know, 20 years, 17 years, something like that growing up. And then I went for, decades without a piano. And as soon as I had a piano again, it was like there were certain pieces of music my conscious brain wasn't used to reading the music, but my fingers knew how to play it. Right.
Yeah, 100%. Funny, we have that in common too. I did piano for like 9 years. So I know that feeling. And exactly, it's like it's just there. Your body just knows. And so that's part of it. And that's what's very cool about the somatic approach to this work is we're very used to the mental approach, as our society is really good at like, let me think about it, let me figure it out, let me explain it, let me talk it out. Even again, talk therapy is amazing for so many things. And a lot of people realize that there's multiple parts to that, of like our mind can be on board, but our body responds first. Our body response happens before our conscious mind can come in. That's just like a biological fact. No one can outsmart that, no matter how smart you are. It is just how
Right.
it works. And so we have to get the body on board, and the body understanding that pathway and those sensations. Otherwise, we're just swimming upstream because the body's already decided how it feels before our mind can tell it otherwise.
Right. Right. So all of this, we've been talking for a few minutes now, and a whole lot of it sounds like woo-woo magic stuff. And I know it's not, and I know it's not, but I think it might be a good moment to sort of take a step back and maybe talk about some of that science, like how the brain
Mhm.
works, how the nervous system works, what is somatic, what does that word even mean, and some of those kinds of things. So I'll let you take a minute there and kind of get everybody up to speed.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it because it is actually, it's all evidence-based. The practices and somatic experiencing is the institution that I've gotten trained through. It's evidence-based. It started with really the premise. The founder got really curious about watching animals in the wild, where in the wild, animals will be in life or death situations where they're literally running from being food for another animal. And then there'd be a process they would go through afterwards that actually help their body discharge that stress, discharge that fight or flight energy, that immense amount of survival energy. And then they didn't show the signs of trauma the same way that humans do often. And we show it from all sorts of, not even life or death situations. We show it like from emotional stress or long-term just general worrying or things like that. So we got really curious about it, and it's really working with the parts, understanding what our nervous system does in each phase. So what that cycle can look like, of what physiologically happens to the body when we identify a threat, of like that kind of bracing up for it, bracing for action, then what physiologically needs to happen for us to discharge that energy, for us to be like, oh, okay, I'm safe now, and then reorient to our surroundings. And so we're working with that same biological process. We're just working with understanding either in a certain event where in that process did the body get stuck or was it incomplete? Or do we have a tendency, even just in general in life, to be stuck in one of those phases? Some people might always feel like they're in fight or flight, or always feel like they're having that kind of play dead. It's our ventral or dorsal vagal state that is that kind of play dead, hopeless, kind of like numb to everything because it all feels like too much. Those are all survival responses in that cycle that we're working with. So it truly is working with our base instincts as just living animals, essentially. And like I said, it has become a very it's been proven in a lot of ways of how that actually has a long-term impact. He started studying it for use around PTSD, for use around long like anxiety and things like that. And it's really been awesome to see that it sticks too. The work actually shows a long-term impact from it, not just like, cool, you feel great after the session, but it all comes back 2 weeks later.
Right. Right. And there's so many things there in what you just said that made me think of fibromyalgia. So I want to talk to our listener just for a quick second. Fibromyalgia is something that often gets us stuck in fight or flight. That's one of the hallmarks of fibromyalgia. Even our sleep, we have alpha awake brain waves happening during delta slow wave sleep. So we're always sort of sleeping even with one eye open, as Dr. Liptan says, looking for saber-toothed tigers at night, right? But we don't need to, right? So physiologically, that's really is what we're doing. I've also seen so many people, talk to so many people in consultations who are in that state that Sarah was just talking about, where like everything is hopeless. I've tried everything, nothing works. And it's this protective state that we sort of come into because it's just too much to keep trying and keep being disappointed. So I just want to point that out for you because I'm sure you are one of those two. Almost all the fibro people I meet are in one of those two places. So
Yeah.
Sarah, what do we do?
Yeah, well, exactly what you just described. It's so powerful to understand and be like, yeah, that's their protection. There's something of like, there's a part of us that we might know a conscious event or moment that created that pattern in that body, or we might not. I mean, I've had, even personally, very profound healing that was stuff that happened from what, like literally my birth story, my birth experience that was stored in. So there was no conscious memory. There was no part of me that was like, when I first came out after I was born, X happened, and I think that's making me anxious. Like there was none of that. It was truly what came through my system of experiences and things like that. So we don't have to justify. I think that's a really important thing to say too. We don't have to justify why it's there or understand it or even know about it to work with it. What we really start to do is we create in small amounts moments. It might even be 30 seconds, but like moments where the body starts to feel safer, where we're creating that feeling of safety for the nervous system with no expectation that it sticks, with no expectation that we solve everything in that moment. But it's like coming up for air for the system. And we do this in a very intentional way that is actually felt, not mental, that we're feeling from our system level that it can feel safety for a moment. And then we start to work with that to create both the capacity to feel the safety and then to look at some of the things that are areas of discomfort head on, but in a way that our body can handle, in a way that our body can digest. So it's very different than like, just tell me your most dramatic moment and we'll go into it. We're actually doing really small little bits so that we can stay connected to the body and it can actually process it. It can digest it, because both of those states are really coming about because there's something that feels like too much for the body. Again, whether it's known or unknown what that something is. And we have to build capacity for the body to start to look at what that something is at least from a nervous system level, before that state's going to resolve itself. So again, it might not necessarily be, oh, you're going to get to the point where you have this memory pop into your head and then you know what it was and it all goes away. It could literally be the body just getting more comfortable feeling both the discomfort and the safety and then coming back into it. But we work with that so that there's more room for it to digest and process, instead of feeling like it constantly is too much and overwhelmed and it needs to block it out to stay safe.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that's happening a lot right now is there's this tension between, gosh, how do I even want to describe it? There's this tension between positive psychology, for lack of a better way of describing it, but just like you have agency over your life, make different choices, you'll have a different life. And also that tipping over into toxic positivity. I've actually had people talk about this podcast as being toxic positivity. And the other side of things being, this is a trauma response. I can't think my way out of it. And I think right now we're living in such a world of both and, more than I think ever before. And sometimes the trauma is in the eye of the beholder. The toxicity is in the eye of the ear of the listener, perhaps. But I also think that there's this both and that's going on. And I love that you talk about not having judgment or not trying to justify whatever you feel, that it just is, right?
Yeah.
For whatever reason.
This is such an important and powerful conversation. So I'm really glad you said that, because my background came from more of the positive, think your way into it. And we just need positive thoughts. And as someone who came from a background with a lot of anxiety, it was important to get my thoughts in check in some ways, because yeah, of course, if you're there are some things we can consciously bring in. It's similar to when we do some of the even somatic work. If we bring in a memory of something that's positive, a memory of a place or a time where you felt really safe or where you felt really comfortable, your body physiologically responds to that. Most people, and I guess not, there's always exceptions, but most people's body will start to relax a little or come into that experience of a little bit more calm, a little bit more safety from just picturing that. So our thoughts can impact our body 100%, but the point needs to be to still be real with what our body is experiencing in that, and use that as a tool to help us maybe balance out things. So if our body is experiencing a lot of pain or a lot of sadness or a lot of anxiety, sure, we need to create some moments where we balance that out with something that feels calmer, something that feels happier, but not to erase the fact that that's there. I actually just talked about that with clients today. In this work, we're not trying to at all then deny all of that. It's actually so we have more capacity to look that head on and to be able to have time where we really actually feel that we feel sad or that we feel angry about something or that we or have regret or whatever that is. And so we have to marry those two worlds. Either one on its own, you can't have one without the other. You're missing a piece of what the body's going to need to fully integrate and experience.
And who just we are, right? We are not a disembodied thought process. Right? We have a physical vessel. We are, moving around with those thoughts. But we're also not just a body with no thoughts. We're not just walking around like a zombie either.
Yeah. Well, and it's a big part of when talking about the nervous system too. I always say our goal isn't to be like Zen cucumbers all the time, actually, as much as a lot of that's where kind of the mindfulness, just think positive, it makes it seem like our goal is to only be Zen or happy and that's it. But actually that's not true. Our goal is to have a full range of emotions and human experiences. If someone does something that's hurtful, or if a sad event happens, we 100% need to feel grief. We need to feel sadness. We even need to feel anger. That is part of being human. That is part of and you can't freeze half of it without freezing all of it. It doesn't work that way in our bodies that we can be yep, we will freeze and get rid of all of the anger and sadness and grief and just experience full happiness. we either are shutting down our whole system's ability to feel. And so we're numbing out on all angles of perceived good and perceived bad emotions, or we're enlivening all of it. And that's the part that can be really challenging for people sometimes, especially if there's a history of anxiety or overwhelm or sadness or depression or things like that. It can feel really scary to say, we're going to have to awaken some of that, but it's all done in a way that's digestible and in a way where the goal isn't, yeah, so you have to feel that all the time. It's so that we can have more access to the other emotions that are desirable too, like the joy and the happiness and the love and things like that. So it just has to be all of them that we work with in order to, like I said, wake the nervous system up around that.
And I think sometimes too, what we're feeling is like physiologically identical. It's just like the context that might make it positive or negative. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to unexpectedly go to Canada for a conference. I didn't have a passport. It was happening in like a week. And I just kept thinking to myself, this is crazy. And then I stopped and I was like, no, this is exciting, right? Like that feeling of anxiety, stress, whatever, and that physiological feeling of this is exciting is the same. And I could choose to interpret it as either this is nuts, what am I doing? Or I could interpret it as, oh my gosh, this is so exciting.
Yeah, well, and it really is almost like it's on the same thread where it's like it just depends how much our nervous system feels capable of digesting the fear side, where it's like, oh, excitement's the base. And if there feels like the fear is manageable enough, we can stay in that excitement range. And we're like, yeah, it's a little nervous, but I'm excited. Whereas if the fear side is getting bigger and our nervous system is more defaulting to memories or patterns where it's like, oh, this is something that's a threat or something to be afraid of or nervous about, then we go to the other side of that same coin. But yeah, that's where understanding how our body looks at each phase, and everyone's body is different. Like, what are those sensations that's excitement? What are those sensations that are a sign it's getting into nerves? And then what are the sensations that are signs we've passed nerves and we're in like full on freak out? And how do we come back that same pathway down the mountain? How do we come back down wherever we might be on that same spectrum? It's so important, because then we, again, like choice, we have then more choice around, can I make this an exciting experience from a like physiological standpoint as well as from a mental standpoint?
I imagine that helps a lot with when you're conscious of what's happening, with being able to set boundaries and things so that it doesn't push you over into the total freak out and can still just be exciting.
Exactly. It's a huge one of being able to like start with ourselves and then bring it relationally. That's always how I word it to clients. And I'm like, we have to understand us first. And then and when we start to discharge some of what our body's heightened responses are, then we can bring the more balanced part of ourselves to do that relationally with others, and to be like, yeah, what needs to happen here? What do I need to say I need or do? Or how do I need to have this conversation so that it feels good for my system and good for relationally what needs to happen?
Definitely. I love that. I love that. Now, when you did your continuing education for my students and coaches, one of the things that you talked about that I think we should talk about here too, is the fact that things like breathing exercises may or may not be doing what you want them to do, and that there's certain things that trigger certain aspects, and we need to just not go out there and willy-nilly do whatever.
Yeah, it's something that unfortunately is missing in the conversation in a lot of places, is that we have our three different nervous system states, where we have our kind of ventral vagal, more balanced state. We have our fight or flight, which is like that activated state. And we have our dorsal vagal, more shut down. That's a really high level, but just to give them buckets. And some types of movement, breath work, things like that can be made to be more activating and that's their intention, where it's like, oh, this type of breath is going to bring up, it's going to be something that's energizing, it's going to be something that pulls energy upwards in the body, which can feel like a rise in anxiety or a rise in just energy. Like that's how it works for us, is when we're getting heightened energy can kind of rise in the body and it stimulates that. And for some people that can feel really good. For example, if we've been in shutdown more and you're like, oh yeah, let's bring in some activation and now I feel more awake, and that feels really great. Or for some people, even if they are activated, you're heightening that amount, but it's still within their capacity to handle it. So they're like, yeah, it feels good because it's a little extreme, but then it discharges some stuff for me and I come back. But then for other people, it doesn't feel good at all because
Right.
it's not what their body was asking for, or it was too much or too soon for their body. And so it's being spoken about in way more broad strokes than I think is beneficial for a lot of people. Because until you get to know your body and your nervous system states like this, you're just kind of along for the ride and you're not necessarily sure, is this really what's helping my body or what it's asking for, based on the nervous system state I tend to be in and based on where I am today, like in this exact moment, based on how the last hour went even.
Right, right, for sure. And I think there's just so much that's being talked about right now with meditation, breath work, yoga, like just that whole world there. And everybody is like, the focus seems to be, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but it seems to me that it's all about calming things down, bringing things down. But for some of us who may not have energy, we actually need what you were just talking about. We need that energy to come up a little bit.
Yeah. And calming down too, again, we have to understand actually more what the body wants to express sometimes to even be able to access calm. So it's similar to the whole, you can't just mantra your way through it or just affirmation your way through it. Like for a lot of people, even who do have high anxiety, there might need to be some ways to let, like exit pathways is the way I often talk about it, to like let some of that energy out before calm is accessible. And calm might not be what your body actually needs the most. Like you were saying, you might need the energy, you might need to feel energized, you might need motivation, you might need to bring in some of that, or you might need to express some of it because you have too much and you might need to let out some anger or some frustration. Everybody's unique. And there is such a place, obviously, we want to learn techniques and protocols and tools, and we want to be given the equation. But one thing I love about not only my background, but something I'm so passionate about how I teach things is it's like you're going to get a set of resources and we're going to actually see what feels good for your body. And it's less instructional. And like, I'm telling you to do A, B, C, D, and you do it and we get there. And it's more like, I'm going to tell you to A, and we're going to see how that feels. And like, what does your body actually want? And your body might tell us to go to like T and skip through these things because that's what it wants. But that in and of itself, of that process and what that brings up for people, because for some people they might be like, yeah, that feels great, and for some it might feel scary, for some it might feel overwhelming. That teaches us so much too about how are we in relation to our own body and our own needs. Do we track that? Do we track how our body's feeling on a daily basis even? And are we able and willing to give ourselves what we need when we need it? And if not, that's most people. We've been taught real well how to live relationally and how to live it for others and in relationship with others. But then that gets to be part of the work. And that also can be really soothing for our nervous system, is to develop a process where we start to feel more comfortable, not only understanding how our body feels, but how to honor that in a way that still feels good and isn't like, oh, I need to run away every time, or I need to cut all these people out of my life, or I can never work at XYZ again. I can do it but take care of my nervous system at the same time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I was thinking as you were talking about all the people that I've talked to who say, I've tried meditation, I just can't meditate. I can't just sit there. And I was thinking, maybe they need a punching bag, right? Like dissipate
100%.
that energy so that you then can.
I can't tell you the number of people who, say they can't, and I'm like, great, then we won't. Like there's like, and then it's more like, why do you want to, is also the other, more to like really get to the heart of it. It's like, what are you hoping to feel or achieve or experience when you do it? And then we get to decide if that's even the pathway that would get your body there. Because if it's like, oh, I want to feel calm, well, maybe that's not your fastest pathway to calm. And maybe it is, but either way, let's understand the intention and work with your body's responses to get to that result versus thinking we have to do XYZ to get there. There's many pathways, and everybody and everybody's experience will benefit from different steps in that.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure the question that's coming up right now is, so like, what kinds of things are there? What kinds of things do you use with your clients? You want to just share some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the broad strokes answer is like it's always a combination of there's some types of breath, there's some types of movement. We're doing some different actions, we're doing how we're talking about it, what we're slowing down in the body. It's a lot of what, if I were to put them all on paper, sound like little things, but we're using it really intentionally to discharge or to activate or to like get your nervous system moving and flowing in a different way than it usually does. So that's kind of like the broad strokes of we're pairing that all together in like an art form in each session to understand how we need to move things and how we need to express them. And then there are, of course, more specific tools that are like, okay, what does that look like when you do it on your own? What does that look like so that you can actually establish those pathways during sessions, but then B, in a stressful situation, have something to do that'll serve your body in that moment.
Yep. That's great. I love the individualization of that. It's something that I do with my clients as well. It's like, especially with fibromyalgia, we might all have the same condition, but it, was caused by different things, manifests in different ways, different things work. And we've really just like, got to get down and like, okay, what does your body really want? What helps it feel better? What helps it feel worse? How do we do more of the good, less of the not so good? All
Yeah,
of that.
exactly. And then just start to pull together, and then also like pull together your own routine, but also really tackle whatever is not working. I mean, people are usually having really specific intentions when they come to me of like, I'm noticing it feels really scary to like be seen by people, or I'm noticing I'm having a really hard time being myself in large groups of people, or I'm noticing that I just have a lot of anxiety on a daily basis, not related to even a certain situation. And I just need to feel like I reset. Like there are very specifics, and that's a big part of it too, is we're not just I mean, some people are just exploring their nervous system for the fun of it. We can do that too. It's really interesting to understand what's happening and what pathways, but most people have something that isn't feeling balanced for them, that we're really exploring what's contributing to that. And so how it's presenting in daily life also makes a big difference of what it's going to look like and what we're going to work on.
Right, right. And all of this, we've been talking about the more mental, emotional component of things, but that also affects our pain levels and our energy levels, which we haven't really talked about. So you want to take a
Yeah.
second on that?
It's such a big one because I personally was shocked by the links to all of this. I wish that more people had talked about how much the nervous system impacts to me earlier in life, because it would have
Right.
saved me a lot of like exploration. Because first of all, energy wise, one thing that my teacher talked about a lot is if we're anxious all the time, or if our body's in this state of feeling unsafe all the time, there's all this heightened energy that it's trying to contain. You could picture it as like all of this fire that's being put in a bottle, where it's like, and that because it's nervous, it's scared, it's like, this is, I need to do this, and there's this, and I feel unsafe. But as a human, we again are not given permission to be like that all the time. We're trying to be okay. We're trying to feel good enough to do what we need to do to get through the day. So we're shoving it all in this bottle that our body is containing for us. And even if we're not conscious of it or not, that's exhausting from a physiological level. Like our
Mm-hmm.
body is doing a lot of work to contain all of that for us. And so a lot of times, yeah, like there's a lot of fatigue that can come along with our nervous system feeling imbalanced. There's a huge amount of energy that can be gained when, on a physiological level, our body's not identifying everything as a threat like it used to. Like there's so many studies out there that have shown that when our nervous system's escalated, we are more likely to identify friendly or neutral objects as a threat than we are. It was like if you a room of like 10 faces, I don't know the exact number, so don't quote me, but it was something like that if there's 10 faces in there, like 3 would be seen as a threat to someone who's in a more balanced nervous system state, and like 6 would be seen as a threat by someone who is in a heightened state. And again, those are not exact numbers, but it's a much bigger amount. So if we think of how exhausting that is for our body to constantly feel threatened by things that it doesn't have to, that aren't actually things it needs to be worried about, that's really tiring. And so that can really go to the energy level side, is if all of a sudden, instead of it being worried about 6 things every day, it could be worried about 4, like that opens up massive amounts of energy, as well as the body pain. It's fascinating to me too, because posture, not just when I say posture, people think I just mean standing up straight, but how we hold our body, all parts, it could be our hips, our feet, our posture,
Your
is
stomach
influenced.
clenched or
Yeah,
relaxed.
stomach clenching, pelvis,
Yep.
our pelvis and pelvic floor is the first thing that tightens in a fight or flight response.
Yep.
Stomach, posture, all of it, it's impacted by our nervous system. And when we hold something, I experienced this personally. I still work through body pains around this, I will be frank, that if our body has been holding something for a long time, then we can get pains where it's like, oh, why all of a sudden is this part of my body tight? Or I've had slipped ribs because I've had so much shoulder tension and that it was pulling ribs out. And it wasn't from any injury. It was literally just because posture changes if we're based on how our nervous system is. So there's so much link, not to mention digestion. So IBS and like digestive issues and gut issues, as well as hormone health, can have links to that, because when our body goes out into that fight or flight or into that dorsal vagal, survival is our body's primary response. All it's worried about is, can I get you through this alive? And so anything that's seen as non-essential, which unfortunately includes things that I would argue are pretty essential, like our hormone health and digestion, they're taken more offline. And so
Yep.
if we're in that long term, that really can have a toll on the body. So it was shocking to me just how much it just can't heal fully for a lot of people until we have the nervous system component in there working for us too.
Mm-hmm. And then there's also the one of the, let me try that again. There's also what one of the neurologists I know talks about, the agony and the pain, right? Like if you twist your ankle, it's going to hurt, right? Like there's just the ordinary clean pain, right? But then there's all the stuff we think and feel about it, right? The guilt we might have for, having somebody have to take care of us, or, feeling bad that we're going to let somebody down because we can't do that thing that we said we were going to do, or, oh, this stupid body, why are you always letting me down? Like all of those thoughts and emotions are the agony, the dirty part of the pain. And if we can take out that, the overall pain load actually comes down.
Yeah, well, and it's really fascinating because as you work with the nervous system, you start to work with, you can, if someone has a specific event like that, where it's like a twist my ankle or a fall, you can work with it to understand where the part that became registered to the body as trauma was. And it's not always the actual incident. People always are like, yeah, the fall was my trauma. A lot of times it might be something else where like afterwards they didn't feel taken care of, or where afterwards they felt guilt or shame, like they were at fault for part of it, or something like that could be actually the part that became trauma, where essentially, again, trauma is defined as too much or too soon or overwhelm. So you might have actually been okay in that moment, and then after all those other factors that you were just describing start to make it too much for the body. So you might not really be working with the content you think you are, because you might think, oh yeah, it's the fall where I twisted my ankle, but you're actually working with something that was hours or days later, but that's where the body got held up and couldn't fully say or express what it needed to.
Mm-hmm. I think what you just said about what trauma is really important. And I would love for you to say that again.
Yeah, because trauma is like how the body registers it, is trauma is too much or too soon, where we're going into overwhelm around a situation. It's not, it is fully based on how our body can go through that cycle It's not about anything arbitrary. That's why two people could go through the exact same experience, and one person might have no signs of anything sticking in the body. They might come out completely the same as how they were before it, and someone else could have a completely different experience that changes them mentally, changes their body, changes how they show up every day. And it's because we are this accumulation of everything our nervous system has been through, everything big and small, how we felt earlier that day, who was there for us after, we are this huge just compilation of experiences in our nervous system. And so it's really just about how our system could go through that individual moment. And it's really important to word it that way, because I think so many people have guilt or stop themselves from exploring this work or getting help in this area because they're like, oh, I'm not a veteran. It wasn't that bad. Yeah. Oh, you have it, like theirs was worse, or this was. And that's really missing the point, because again, if it was too much for your body in that moment with how it was exactly then, maybe if it had happened 3 hours later, it would have been different for you. But that moment, there was something there that was just too much or too soon for the body. And when we can give ourselves grace around that, then there's so much potential to free that up and to change things versus keeping ourselves stuck in the story of like, well, it wasn't that bad and I should be fine and I'll figure it out later.
When sometimes it really is just the straw, that one additional straw that was just too much. And it didn't matter if it was just stubbing your toe, like the world has now ended.
And there's a reason. And that's the other thing. It can seem so silly or so weird in the moment of like, why was this too much? Or like, why did this push me? But I've never had people go into the body and not had like a physiological experience about it that makes it feel justified, is maybe the right word to use. And it's not necessarily always mental. Sometimes people, again, have mental stuff where they're like, oh, that really made me react to this, which connects the dot here. But sometimes it's even just physiologically feeling how viscerally the body was feeling something, whether that's sadness, fear, anger, grief, whatever. And when you can tap into that and feel that, you like realize how like real that is. This wasn't just a mental thought that was like, oh, I'm being a baby about it and I should get over it. It's like there was a visceral emotion there that needed to happen and be expressed. And it's really cool when people can actually feel that and move through it and be like, okay, like that was real for whatever reason. And now I was able to give my body the gift of not having to contain that, not having to operate in that same way moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. So at this point of the conversation, I would love for you to give us some practical, like what are some things we can do to maybe start playing with these ideas or practicing that way down the mountain as you described it?
Yeah, so there's so many, and especially as we already talked about in the conversation, nothing is one size fits all. So I'm always like, take with a grain of salt that this is just something to try and start playing with. But the biggest thing is you're wanting to start to first of all, start to track in your body how it's starting to feel. So starting to notice and having check-ins is usually one of the first things I tell my clients. And I'm like, all right, if you were to like stop and just notice what sensations are there, notice what's here, how would you describe it? And how easy does that feel for you? And sometimes I love having people start with like the legs too, because we don't think about our thighs all that often. Like, can you even feel the legs? Like, what do your legs feel like? Or what does it feel like when you're sitting and you push your heels into the ground? How would you describe that sensation of what it feels like to literally have your heel go in and then push and then relax? Like, what are those sensations to you? What does it feel like to have your shoulders against the chair and maybe to lean back into it and to not? And it sounds really simple, but it can actually be really challenging. And it can first show us like, do I feel connected to those places in my body? And B, how do I start describing sensation like that? Because again, it's really new for us to come from a place of noticing in our body without a story attached, to not be like, oh, there's some really obvious ones around pain where people are like, oh yeah, I know what it feels like that my shoulder hurts, or I know what it feels like when my stomach's tight. but can we broaden that amount of experiences to neutral or maybe even positive sensations? And what does that feel like in tracking? So I start people there to just start to create that new part of the brain that might think that way, as well as then we want to start registering some things that feel, again, slightly pleasant or neutral for the body in general. So it can be one exercise I love to give to people is to just look around the room, and like as you're looking around the room, identify 3 things in the room that it feel pleasant to look at, whatever those might be, and then name in their mind's eye what are those 3 things, and then what can you see, what can you hear, what can you smell, what can you taste, what can you feel as you're still looking at that pleasant object. We're bringing the body back into the present by doing that. So we're actually, instead of being worried about the future, worried about the past, we're bringing the body back to the present, what's here, and then we're noticing how that feels. So this is really important because, again, the expectation isn't necessarily that the present feels calm. It's so you might come back and you might be like, wow, now I'm really aware of the fact that my hip's in pain, or that I feel nauseous, or that I'm sad. Like it might bring awareness to not as pleasant sensations, but then that's information to be like, oh, okay, so that's what's here for me right now. What do I need to do? Do I need to then find other things that are what are called external resources to help the body feel safe because this present moment doesn't feel good? Or did the present moment feel safe enough and calm enough? And I can start to work with that. And so then from that information, we then get to start building like a bigger cake almost of like how it's going to, what we're going to work with, what we're going to use to make the body feel safe, and then what we need to tackle that are those things that are bringing on discomfort or anxiety, or the body identifying it as a threat.
I think this is a really important exercise, particularly for chronic pain patients, chronically ill patients, because we do tend to disassociate from our bodies a little bit, right? We sort of check out from the neck down because it's just too much, right? And so I love this exercise of getting back into your body and just like going through the senses. What can I notice or feel? And one of the things that I know you've said before is that when you're in that little bit of disassociated state, you'll find that there's a sense. Like maybe you're like, I can't hear anything. Wait, what?
Yeah, it's really, or like thinking of the name of things. That's the interesting one. That was like my first sign that I was like kind of checking out more than I realized, because someone gave me that exercise and I was like, all right, that's super easy. We're not like in kindergarten. We can do this. This is fine. And then I did it and I would be like staring at a pen and I'd be like, oh, right, pen, that is what that is. That is that. And that just made me realize, I was like, oh, I'm not here, like I'm not here fully. It wasn't that like, oh, I'm forgetting the word it was like that about every object in the room. It was like I could feel my brain have to like recalibrate to be here, to really see that, to really be like, oh, that's a pen, that's what's there. And so it's really helps just slowly bring those things online, and again doing it in a really gentle way. The reason I say start with an object that feels pleasant to look at is if as you come into the body you do have chronic pain or a lot of discomfort, again that pleasant thing to look at is an external resource, so you can always come back to that and just be like, okay, how does it feel looking at that color, looking at that object, looking at that thing? And everybody's different. Like I said, some people find internal resources really calming and we really lean on those, and some people don't, because yeah, there is a lot of anger, sadness, grief, or pain, and we're focusing on external. And all of those start to be, yeah, how do we get some feeling of okay-ish, okay enough? It doesn't have to be full peace, it doesn't have to be full safety, pain-free, carefree. That's not actually the goal. We're just trying to get moments of like, I feel okay enough, so that the nervous system can come, have a breath, and then again we build on that to then work with how do we make more of those okay enough moments, and then how do we tackle some of the things that the nervous system is worried about and are keeping it from feeling okay enough when it might otherwise be able to.
Yeah, yeah. So for you listening, if you want to try this out, hit the pause button and do what Sarah said. Find something that's pleasant to look at, and then start going through your senses. What do you feel? What do you hear? What do you taste? What do you smell? And just see how that is for you.
Yeah. And it's information. That's how I always say we're information gathering in the beginning, just to be able to understand what we're working with in the body. So in itself, of course, I'm not expecting everyone's like, great, now I'm all healed from everything. It's a really simple, we're just starting and getting information. And then from there, we're noticing like, oh, was that challenging? Did that feel calming? How did the body respond? And then there's so much we can build on from there.
Awesome. I love it. So for people who are interested in more, why don't you share the ways to get in touch with you? I think you also have like some downloadable resources.
Yes, I do have a worksheet on my website. So my website's just my name, so sarahkleiner.com. And then there is a downloadable worksheet that kind of goes through actually some of what I went through today, of just the different states of the nervous system, some resources, some tools to try. And so on there, there's information about, you can email me. My email is on there. It's sarah@sarahkleiner.com. And then, yeah, I have some one-on-one spots to do with people, and then some small groups that I do in our group work. We're really going through the core tools for the nervous system to understand what we can use, what works for the body, what we can start to integrate into daily life that will help, again, just break up some of these cycles, and can be used for really specific intentions depending on what's present for you.
Awesome. So if you guys aren't sure how to spell Sarah's name or anything like that, I'll make it super easy for you. Just go to today's show notes page, fibromyalgiapodcast.com/81. I'll have the link to her website, the download, all that stuff will all be right there for you, so you can connect with Sarah. I think the most important thing that I learned when you did our continuing education class was the fact that different tools need to be used in different ways for different things. And so you need a little bit of guidance in that, perhaps. And so it's important to, if you want to do this kind of work, to work with somebody who really does understand where you're at and what the heck is going on, or they could actually give you something that doesn't help.
Yeah, 100%. And it's just everyone, like you said, everyone's system is different, and it's really hard for us to do on our own. I get a lot of, I'm a really independent, like, let's just figure it out person. So I also get a lot of those in my world who are like, okay, I just want to, like, give me 10 tools, I'll do them myself. The challenge is, again, our nervous system is wired to keep us safe and protect us from things that could feel like too much or too soon. So we aren't able to fully see what we need to dive into oftentimes ourselves, because it's become, our body's like hidden it for us out of love, where it's like, this would be a lot, we don't really want to go there. And so in with having help by a practitioner, they can start to bring that out in really bite-sized digestible amounts. They can see how the body is physiologically reacting, track things as you're talking about things, and really gently and lovingly, and in a way that your system can handle, can bring that up in a way that we can't really do for ourselves. I wish that I could, I wish I could find the way that I'm like, yes, go off and do it. But it really is helpful to have someone see that and witness that and bring awareness. I can't tell you how many times I was shocked by what I ended up going into with my practitioners, where I was like, oh, I didn't know that was there. I would never have seen that, felt that, brought that up, because again, my body was keeping it lovingly as a blind spot for me. So it's really important. And it's not all a self plug, I promise. There's a big network of amazing people who do this work, who have different backgrounds as well. So if there's ever a specialty based on medically what's happening, or based on what's going on in life, I also have some amazing people who I refer to all the time, just to make sure you have someone who has the right background for what's going on in your body.
Absolutely. It's the same way with our coaches, I mean, what your life is like, the experiences you've been through. Some people are just more equipped to help you than others. And so it's good to have those resources. So Sarah, just to kind of wrap up for today, what do you want to make sure that people know about all of this, about befriending their nervous system, about the kind of work that can be done, about what you have to offer? What do you want people to know?
Yeah, I think if I were to summarize it, like I would want people to know just the potential of what's all there. I think it's becoming a buzzword to talk about nervous system, somatic work, all of that. The vagal nerve is becoming like trending on all platforms of how to do all these hacks. And I'm really excited that it's getting awareness built about it, but I think it's making people underestimate the depth of it. It's becoming like, oh, it's like a yoga class, you can do it, it calms you down occasionally, but then like it's not really, they're not seeing the impact that it can make longer term. And it's a really different process to actually go in and use this for more of the resolution work, to use this to actually go through that whole cycle we were talking about, and to really actually create those new pathways for yourself. That's not just the whole, we'll calm it down or we'll have this hack that we do once. That's an actual physiological process that has so much potential there. And so I just want to be a voice for how much that can be, again, regardless of how you pursue doing it, for how much potential there is there, and for really exploring it and giving it a chance to, see what it can do, because it's been really life-changing for me, to just even learn how this all works and learn why my body does what it does, and learn how many symptoms that I experienced in my body and in life came from the nervous system. And so, just to even get that message out there so that it'll reach the people who need it and who have been waiting for something that would actually work like this.
Right. Especially all those people who've tried so many things and just didn't, find the right thing or the right person.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for this, Sarah. It's always awesome talking with you. And I'm so excited. I mean, because I've known you before you really got into this work. And I love that this is what you're doing now, because it was sort of always what you were doing.
It was always, I got more science and more like of understanding why I was doing what I was doing is really what it's 100% was always what was happening. Now I just understand the entire science background of it.
It's awesome. Thanks again. And for our listeners, hang on. I've got our listener shout out and a couple more resources for you.